Good evening and welcome to Coach World TV. My name is Terry Yoffe, and tonight as my guest I have Jacqueline Wales. Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Nice to be here, Terry.
Actually, Jacqueline, before I introduce her, was a guest a year ago, August, I think we
Yeah.
said. And it was so successful, and we had such a great time that I invited her back. So Jacqueline is the author of several books, including The Fearless Factor. She's a speaker and a leadership development coach. And tonight we're going to be talking about the fearless factor and what does that mean. So, what does it mean?
Well, here's the thing. The fearless factor. What is your fearless factor is the question that I ask many of the people I speak to. So let me ask the audience tonight, what is your fearless factor? Now, right now you're sitting there thinking, what is she talking about? So we all have fear in our lives, right? It's normal. It creeps up on us in the most unexpected ways, and frequently we live with it as a kind of the undercurrent of what's going on in our lives. But what is fear? Fear is primarily our inability to trust that we can handle whatever comes our way. So your fearless factor is about the choices and the decisions you make when the fear shows up. That's really what we're looking at. It's a choice factor here. Because I like to say, Terry, fear is a choice, and fear actually is an excuse. It's an excuse for not moving, because let's face it, fear is imagination based.
Of course, it's a belief.
It's a belief.
Right.
It's something that you've got going on between your ears. You figure it must be true because I'm thinking it. And of course, as coaches, what are we all about? Helping people to change their thinking, which happens because we help them change their belief systems, which in turn changes the behavior. And then, of course, we change lives. But we start with that fear issue. Where do you not show up for yourself? Where do you find the excuse to say, I'm going to fail? Where do you find the stories that you tell yourself about why you're not competent or capable or lovable? There's two basic fears in life, you know. The fear is I'm not good enough, and the fear is I'll never be loved.
I certainly know the I'm not worthwhile, I'm not valued, I'm not good enough. I think that's totally universal. I mean, certainly with the clients that I have, when you start to look underneath, everything, that's predominantly the thread. And I love the other one, I'm not loved.
Yeah.
Or how can I be loved?
Yeah.
Or, and I think that ties into the worthwhileness and not good enough.
Yeah. So if we think of the issue of being worthy, which is really what we're talking about here, when we lack confidence, when we don't ask for what we want, when we don't communicate our needs, wants, and desires adequately, or when we continue to play small when we have a big dream, what is behind all of that?
I love the one where, most people play small.
Yeah.
And even though they could have big jobs too.
Yeah.
And yet, they still play small. Or those that could be out there really doing something, and they just play close to the vest, if you will.
Well, here's a big thing, and you said, touched upon people who are already very successful, and they're still playing somewhat small. There's something called the impostor syndrome. Have you know about this?
Oh, yeah.
And specifically with women, they do struggle with that because it's all about, I'm going to be found out. I'm really not as smart as I think I am. I'm not as credible as other people think I am. That I've gotten here just by sheer luck as opposed to hard work and competency. And so that undermining of self that comes up again and again with people, this is the place where we as coaches need to step in order to help them change. And certainly in my own practice, I work with a lot of high achieving women, and they're all about leadership. And my role is to teach them how to become better leaders. And number one, it starts with personal mastery. You've got to really know your strengths, your weaknesses, your values, the things that are really important to you, your priorities, your accomplishments. I had one client who said to me, I really hate talking about my accomplishments because it feels like I'm kind of tooting my own horn. Well, in my book, it's like, yeah, go forth and toot your own horn. So I said to her, how about we reframe that? How about we look at your accomplishments as experiences? Do you think you would be more comfortable talking about those as experiences? Oh, yeah. Now, this is a client who climbed up Kilimanjaro. You know, as she was, yeah, I hiked to the top of Kilimanjaro. Hello? Is that an accomplishment?
Right.
Absolutely it is. But she doesn't want to talk about it. So it's an experience. Yeah,
So,
I've had that experience.
So why, you know, I have to tell you a little secret, you know. Sometimes when I go to my website, and it's pretty extensive, and I look through it, and all the testimonials, I say, who the heck is that person that owns that website? I do. And, wow, I did that?
Yeah.
You know, it's, so, you know, sometimes I'm a little, I don't use the word guilty, but a little overwhelmed by, you know, what's there.
Yeah. I think here's what I talk a lot about, and I talk about it in the Fearless Factor, the ownership. I have another client right now who struggles with her confidence, and she has all the skills, the competency. She's achieved a great deal in her life. The confidence piece is missing because she doesn't own it. And the owning piece for all of us in our professions and in what we do in the world, that's where we really step into the bigger game. Because then there's no excuses.
No, it's as you said, it's taking ownership of who you are, what you've accomplished, or what your experiences have been over the years. And
so let me ask this simple question. If you don't take ownership of it, who will?
Are you talking to me or talking to the audience?
Talking to the audience, because there's a few in the audience right now who are looking at this and going, yeah, I get it, I get it.
Right.
But I'm also saying to you, what happens when you take ownership of all of your accomplishments, of all the successes and failures? Failures. Because here's the other thing about your Fearless Factor. It's about failures.
Well, you know what they say, in at least the coaching school I went to, there's no such thing as failure, there's only feedback.
That's right. And here's what I like to say is that we're all failing our way to success. And so if you understand that you don't have success without making mistakes, without making choices that were the wrong choices, and then making another choice in order to move yourself forward. And how many people stop themselves because they don't want to be in that discomfort of feeling like they are a failure, which is a self-designation, by the way, or accepting that failure is simply a process that we all have to go through in order to learn.
And a lot of people don't feel that if they fail or don't do something correctly, it's a blemish.
Oh, yeah.
I have had several clients, and one I'm working with now, who, you know, is afraid of failing, so does nothing.
Yes.
And, you know, if you look at that, it's feedback and it's growing. And the other thing, I think, with making a mistake or not doing something correct the way it should be done, I think the ownership part is standing up and saying, I made a mistake. I've recently had to do that, as I was telling you, on several times, and I've had to apologize and say, okay, I'm going to take responsibility for what I did. That's the other part of that you are big enough to not say, it's not my fault, it's your fault, or it's you know,
well,
the dog's fault.
This brings you to the blame issue. You know, I like to talk about the blame, because when we get into blame, the pointing of fingers, we got to turn it back around.
Right.
And say, yes, I messed up.
Right.
And so I have to correct it. And that's what happened. You messed up. So you cleared it up. But so many people, when they mess up, go into shame. They go into lockdown. They go into, I'm a bad person.
Right.
And then it
Right.
becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy for them.
Right.
As opposed to take ownership and say, yep, messed up. Could have done it better. Could have had a different outcome.
Right.
Exactly. Somebody else suffered as a result of this. And all I can say is, I'm sorry. I'll do better next time. But that takes a lot of courage. And you and I were talking about the nature of courage. And the courage in being vulnerable to that piece. And again, we were talking also about vulnerability. Vulnerability is the hardest piece for so many people.
And actually, what we were talking about, interesting, I was in London recently, and as I was mentioning, Brené Brown, she has a new book out, and it escapes me, but I have her autograph. What she talked about a lot was the difference between guilt and shame. Guilt is, okay, I made a mistake, but shame is, oh my God, I'm a bad person, and feeding it into yourself.
It feeds into that I'm not good enough piece again.
Exactly.
Yep.
And about vulnerability. And the one thing that I really work on with my clients is about allowing them to be vulnerable, because there's a strength that comes with vulnerability and allowing people to see, I make mistakes. I'm not perfect. I make mistakes, and I hate to use the word fail, but for no better word tonight, I didn't do it right, and I apologize. If I could have done it better, I would have. And showing vulnerability.
Who amongst us has no faults? You know, they say in biblical terms, you know, the first person cast the stone, whatever the case may be.
Exactly.
Every single one of us has flaws. That's what makes us human. And when we can share our humanity is what makes a difference. When I wrote The Fearless Factor, I basically put it all in there. You've read this. So it's really warts and all. I have made many mistakes, and I have caused some suffering for people in my lifetime as a result of it. And there was a time in my life when I absolutely could not say I was wrong. I had to be right. And of course, when you have to be right all the time, guess what? 50% of the time you're probably wrong.
And it's I would imagine, a very heavy burden to carry.
It's a very
around.
heavy burden, and it's heavy on the people around you too, because there's no room for growth in that mindset. It is simply about, this is just the way it is, and I'm not moving. There was a book written by Carol Dweck where she talked about mindset. It's actually called Mindset, and I highly recommend it.
Really?
You've either got a growth mindset or a fixed mindset. And when you come from the fixed mindset, it's simply, this is the way it is and nothing changes. And I like to live my life on this particular track. If you come from a growth mindset, it's simply a matter of, if that didn't work, we'll try something else. And we're at least willing to explore. And I like to say life is an adventure. So if life is an adventure, we're all explorers. Because after all, how was the world founded? And how was it discovered? By many different people. So when you think about the mindset that you're holding, are you fixed or are you in growth mindset? Now as coaches, we should be, and I actually want to backtrack on that, take the word shoot out, because should belongs to the word shoulders, and it's the burden, and it's on your shoulders. As coaches, we would hope that we are in growth mindset, because we are all about helping other people to grow, grow to become their best selves, whatever that means. And we all have different variations of that.
Exactly. And I'm loving all of this. I really am, and it's just so great having you back on.
Thank you.
You know,
my pleasure.
It's such great food for thoughts, great fertile ground here to be looking at all of what we know, what we do, what we should or could or whatever it is.
The shoulda, woulda, couldas, which I call like the three curses, the shoulda, woulda, coulda curses, because that's where we get caught.
And yet being willing to be fearless, to say I'm afraid or I have the fear and do it anyway. Someone else's book.
And there's the vulnerability piece. Feel the fear and do it anyway. It was
Right.
written by Susan Jeffers about 25 years ago. And Susan actually endorsed the Fearless Factor.
Okay.
And when she endorsed it, I'll tell you a funny little story. We were introduced through a mutual friend, and I wrote and said, I'm doing this book called The Fearless Factor. And she wrote back and she said, well, I don't endorse other people, especially when they're talking about what I've the expert on. And she said, well, since I know so-and-so, send me the manuscript anyway. So she read it, and she wrote back, and she said, I don't normally do this, she said, but I think you've done a pretty good job on following up on Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And when you quote me, make sure you quote me correctly. So the phrase I use about, the fear part is not trusting ourselves. I'm not the origins of that. That was Susan Jeffers. But truly, it is about feel the fear and do it anyways. And when you read my book, The Fearless Factor, and you see the litany, and I say litany, of things that I went through to be who I am today, I had to discover my fearless factor because I had to keep stepping it up. And that's the playing the bigger game piece. I stood in front of a room of 250 people, and I stood up to talk about why I wasn't achieving the things that I wanted to achieve. And the man who was doing the seminar looked at me and he said, so why are you playing small? And I was like, that. And he said, the choice is yours. You can play small or you can play big. Now, Marianne Williamson had done, the whole thing about who are you to play small. And she's another one who endorsed the Fearless Factor.
Wow. Very nice.
Which was wonderful. And funny story on that one, too, is that I'd given her the manuscript at a workshop I attended of hers, and I said, I'd really like an endorsement. I don't know if you got the time. She said, I don't have the time either, but, well, I'll take it anyway. About a year goes by, and I'm almost kind of giving up. I'm thinking, nah, that's never coming. And then one Sunday afternoon, I open up and I read this email. I spent the morning on the couch with your book, and I'm thrilled by it, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if you want an endorsement, but I'm going to give you one anyway. And I had to read it twice to know that it was from Marianne Williamson. I was like, oh, it's Marianne Williamson. Oh, my God. Now, talk about playing the bigger game. I was extremely nervous when I walked up to her with that manuscript in hand of her caliber to say, could you please? And then at a certain point, releasing it, because you can't do this with that kind of stuff. You have to just say, whatever will be, will be.
It's great. I think we all struggle with fearless factors. And, I'm sure every day, every week, every month, we come to that line in the sand, if you will, where we have to kind of step over it to do something that we'd rather not. And talk ourselves, okay, I don't really want to do this. This is my comfort zone from here down. But I know I've got to step over the line. But I wonder how many people look at what's ahead of them and rationalize, well, I didn't want the promotion anyway.
That's right. But that's the justification for it. That's
the
all it is.
rationalization.
It's the
I'm
rationalization.
just using that. Or, well, I don't really need to make that phone call anyway. It's
and
okay.
I didn't want that, and so on and so forth.
Somebody said something that I didn't take the right way. I'll let it go. I mean, how many of us do that?
And we've all done it at some point in our lives.
We kind of.
And how many opportunities are missed?
That's true.
Because of that. I like to say that my tagline for my business is to turn your obstacles into opportunity 1 week at a time. Isn't that what we do as coaches? We help our clients turn their obstacles into opportunity 1 week at a time. And there's a great quote I want to share with you and with the audience. It's a Tony Robbins quote. But he says, the quality of our life is determined by how much uncertainty we can comfortably live with. The quality of our life is determined by how much uncertainty we can comfortably live with. Isn't that the fearless factor?
How much uncertainty, as a matter of fact. That's so funny. I have a client that she doesn't like going out to look for a job because she doesn't see a clear vision of what it is, and she has no clue. So the question I asked her was, how can you be with the uncertainty and still move ahead
Yes.
and
Yeah.
create what you want?
Yeah.
So it's,
And here's the piece that's missing for a lot of people. There are no guarantees on anything.
right.
Life is
Uncertain.
about change.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's about uncertainty.
That's the joke. That's the irony. We're all living in uncertainty.
Yes.
Every day.
Every day. In
Right.
fact, I like to speak about this is our reality. Everything else that we've discussed even a minute ago is already gone. And what we're about to talk about in 5 minutes is not even here yet. So
Right.
this is it.
Living in the moment.
Living
Being in
in
the
the
moment.
moment.
In the moment's the reality.
This is it.
Right.
Everything else is a function of the mind.
Right. Right.
And what we've done and where we're going. And a lot of the fear that goes on is what happened in the past will happen again in the future. And you forget that
right.
in this present moment, this is your moment of choice. This is your fearless factor moment.
And people will make choices based on what past experience
That's
they
exactly
had.
right. Yeah.
So if they had a terrible experience with something and a similar type of, not the same, but a similar, they will not want to go for it because they remembered, gee, this is what happened there, I better not go forward.
That's right.
Not understanding that's, looking in the rearview mirror
Yes.
instead of looking in the, the window shield moving forward.
And this is something, again, that I talk about a lot in my work, is that we're conditioned by our past. And here's the other big thing about fear. We're conditioned into our fears. Think about that for a minute. Where did you first learn fear?
Something when you were a young person.
Okay, so think about throwing a baby up in the air. What does it have? A startle response. Now, the fear thing is very primitive. It's the amygdala. It's at the base of the spine, the skull, and it's got a little, a little thing this size. It's very small. But that's the place we go to primitively, the fight or flight mechanism. So you can see that in a young baby. It's unsure. It's up in the air. But you also witnessed fear in the people around you that were important to you, your parents, your authority figures, in their anxiety, in their anger, in their frustration. A lot of that is fear-based. So we learn the behaviors around those particular circumstances, and many times that conditioning becomes ours. And one of the things that I constantly ask my client is, whose stuff is this?
Right. You're not living your life. You
living-
kind of take a back seat.
That's right.
And somebody else is running the show.
Yeah.
Whatever that fear is actually, the workshop that I do, when do you stand in your power and when do you give it away? Well, we all give it away to our emotions, and that includes fears,
Yes.
to other people,
Yeah.
and we even give it up to situations.
Yeah.
All of those things contribute, especially emotions. So we do give up who we are
Yeah.
to our fears,
Yeah.
because they run us, and we kind of step back.
Yeah.
Well, the fear is here doing its thing.
So here's the other thing. You have to ask yourself, what stories are you telling yourself?
Yeah.
What stories are the stories that are running your life? I like to say either you're living in someone else's epic novel or you're the author of your own life.
Right.
So you get to choose. Again, that issue of choice, what you want to do. I am definitely the author of my life. And if you get the opportunity to read The Fearless Factor, which you can do by going to my website.
Why don't you give us your website?
Yes. The website is thefearlessfactor.com. Very simple, thefearlessfactor.com. And when we're able to understand that the stories we tell ourselves are not necessarily the truth.
Right.
And this is a key question that I ask when people tell me their stories. Is it true? Now, if you ask that simple question in your coaching practice, is it true? People will stop in their tracks and usually say, I don't think it is. So if it isn't, then who's doing the storytelling here?
Right.
And that's the epic novel piece. You're reliving the stuff that you kind of grew up with that became your reality. But hopefully, if you're being coached or if you're coaching others, you're teaching them how to develop a whole different reality.
Piggybacking on that, I always ask my clients, so what story are you telling?
Yeah.
You know, what's the story here? Is it based on these facts, or is this belief and interpretation?
Yes.
What's going on? And 99% of the time, it's interpretation.
That's right.
There is not a fact in what they're saying. Not a fact.
And that brings up an important piece on the fear issue, which is this. Unless you have empirical evidence that you are going to fail, that something disastrous is going to happen, that you really aren't good enough, or whatever the story is that you're telling yourself, unless you have empirical evidence for it, it's all made up.
Definitely. It's and for most people, the sad part is it's all made up. I mean, I have clients, well, I had this meeting and he didn't like what I said, and he didn't like me, and he didn't do, and then I say, did he tell you that?
Yeah.
No. Then are we saying this is an interpretation and belief that you have? Yes. Okay. So what do you need to do now to get out of the interpretation? Because it's all bull.
Yeah.
It's
that's
nothing.
Exactly.
It's and I always say to my clients, better you should go get a Hans Christian Andersen book and read that.
Yeah.
Has the same validity.
But here's the other piece of this. How arrogance plays into the fact that you think you know what someone else is thinking.
Right.
We're not mind readers, but because of our behaviors and because of our previous patterns, we already have built in the story of what they're thinking, doing, where they're going.
Right. Circling back to before we have to say goodbye, is it's all about what you started with, feeling good enough.
Yeah.
And trusting yourself and caring about yourself.
Yes.
That's the circle of when people make these things up, because they already have a belief that they're not good enough or they're not valued.
Yeah.
So somebody else is validating it by what you believe they're thinking.
And the self-care piece is huge for all of us. We all need to learn how to take better care of ourselves and to also exhibit some kind of compassion and kindness and forgiveness, so that when you do make mistakes, when you do feel like you're holding back, when you feel like you're not really stepping it up all the way, be kind to yourself. You know, it's a process.
So on that note, this went way too quickly, very engaging. We could still be talking.
Yes.
I want to say thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry.
You're very
I really
welcome.
appreciate it.
Thank you.